At exactly 9:30 in the evening, my phone vibrated on the cold granite counter of the Crystal Lake Enclave estate. My daughter-in-law Amanda was downtown at the exclusive Horizon Club, celebrating her promotion to Regional Strategy Director with a $95 a plate dinner. The entire family was there, laughing and toasting. I was left behind in the quiet, my hands still smelling of the bleach I used to clean their floors after ironing my son Ryan's corporate shirt. Then, Amanda's text flashed on the screen. Mother-in-law, remember to heat up the leftovers in the fridge. Don't waste them. I didn't cry. I didn't type out a furious paragraph demanding to know why my own grandchildren were eating $95 dishes while I was meant to stare at a cooling bowl of soup. Instead, I set the phone down with frozen, calculated precision. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. For 3 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. But standing there, looking at a text message that reduced my devotion to a chore, the illusion dissolved. I realized my presence here had become a monthly subscription, with me footing the bill. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and the balance had just hit zero. This wasn't a breakdown, it was an accounting. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my steps deliberate. The grand hallway smelled of expensive wood polish and a profound, hollow, emotional isolation. There was no panic in my chest, only an unyielding clarity. I bypassed the temptation to throw their designer items or cause a screaming scene. I was done reacting to their emotional crumbs. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out the vintage leather suitcase, the same one my late husband Charles and I used for our final anniversary trip. Its worn surface felt grounding, a solid reminder of a time when my name meant something more than a domestic title. Methodically, I began to reclaim my identity from the corners of the room. I packed the silver locket Charles had bought me, its cool metal heavy against my palm. I folded my mother's hand-quilted textiles, tracing the intricate stitching that carried decades of genuine love. I tucked away the old ancestral portraits, removing the people who actually loved me from a house that treated me like a ghost. I didn't pack everything, only what was indisputably mine. The simple linen blouses, the worn, comfortable shoes, the fragments of the life I lived before I agreed to become an invisible, unpaid servant. Every object placed in that leather case was a boundary being drawn in stone. By 11 o'clock, the bedroom was stripped of my essence. It looked completely bare, functioning as an absolute void in the center of their pristine home. I carried the heavy suitcase down the stairs, my 69-year-old legs aching but holding firm under the weight of my newly found freedom. I loaded the bags into the car, breathing in the chilly night air that felt cleaner than it had in years. Before I closed the front door behind me for the last time, I paused. I took the house keys out of my pocket and placed them gently on the ledge next to the inside deadbolt. I pulled the heavy door shut, hearing the lock click into place with freezing finality. As the car moved down the dark suburban streets, leaving the Crystal Lake Enclave estate behind, I leaned my head against the window. I was heading to my oldest friend Sarah's house, where a warm room was waiting. In my mind, I could already see the scene that would play out when Ryan and Amanda returned home, tipsy and flushed with corporate arrogance, expecting to find their compliant housekeeper waiting to heat up their leftovers. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me over the years. They were simply about to be shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. Tomorrow, the true accounting would begin. The guest room at Sarah's house was quiet, smelling faintly of lavender and old books. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated luxury of Crystal Lake Enclave. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my mother's old wooden sewing box on my lap. My hands, still slightly rough from 3 years of continuous dishwater and bleach, traced the worn grain of the oak. I opened the latch and lifted the top tray, reaching past the old spools of thread to pull out a black, spiral-bound, hardcover ledger. This wasn't just a notebook, it was a chronological record of my survival. It held the raw, unvarnished data of 3 long years of calculated domestic subjugation. Looking at the blank spaces between the lines, my mind slipped back to the months immediately following Charles's passing. When pancreatic cancer took him in less than 6 months, the silence in my old craftsman home became a physical weight. Every corner screamed his absence. When my son, Ryan, came to me with his wife Amanda on his arm, flashing that transactional smile I had known since his boyhood, I was emotionally bankrupt. They told me they wanted a larger house for the children, Caleb and Zoe, but the prices in the market were impossible. They needed a down payment of $150,000. They suggested I sell my home, invest in their future, and move in with them. They called it becoming a real family. What I realize now is that my immediate compliance wasn't standard weakness. It was a protective survival mechanism to avoid absolute abandonment. In the raw wake of my widow's grief, the fear of total isolation paralyzed my judgment. I handed over my independence like a clinical transaction, trading the equity of my past for the promise of a shared future. I stepped into their magnificent lakeside villa and allowed myself to become invisible, thinking that absolute compliance was the premium I had to pay to guarantee I was loved. It was a psychological contract I signed in silence. I chose to swallow the subtle humiliations, the constant inspections of my cleaning, and the daily microaggressions, formatting my silence into a desperate asset to keep the peace. For 3 years, I lived inside a prison without bars. Psychologists call it learned helplessness, a state where you are conditioned to believe you have no control over your environment, so you simply stop trying to escape. I became a ghost, haunting their perfect, superficial lifestyle. Amanda would run her fingers over the shelves looking for dust, criticizing the way I ironed Caleb's shirts, while Ryan looked at his plate in silence, refusing to audit his wife's cruelty. I watched them take family photos in front of the Christmas tree, with Amanda asking me to step behind the lens because I had a steadier hand. I was written out of the family script while keeping the stage running. But sitting in the quiet of Sarah's room, looking at the ledger, the invisible chains shattered. My compliance was over. The survival phase had ended, and the audit had officially begun. I turned the pages of the ledger slowly under the soft glow of Sarah's lamp. Every line was a financial scar, a documentation of how my generosity had been weaponized against me. Amanda believed her corporate promotion gave her absolute sovereignty over that household, but numbers don't lie. I had tracked every single dollar since the day I sold my historical craftsman estate for $900,000. The first entry was the down payment, $150,000 in cash, delivered straight to the bank, where I co-signed the mortgage to qualify them for a premium rate. Amanda had smiled so sweetly that day, claiming they were finally building their dream. But it wasn't their dream, it was my equity funding, their illusions of grandeur. I scanned down the list of expenditures, watching the balance sheet strip away their unearned arrogance. $3,200 over a custom living room suite because Amanda claimed my existing furniture looked too historical for her sleek aesthetics. $6,500 for a luxury master suite upgrade because a regional director couldn't possibly prepare for work in a standard bathroom. I had paid for the plumbing repairs, the designer fixtures, and the landscaping that kept the Enclave Homeowners Association from issuing fines. They wore their lifestyle like a badge of personal achievement, but the entire facade was heavily subsidized by a widow's pension they treated as an automated resource. Then came the monthly mortgage breakdown, the ultimate proof of their transactional fraud. The monthly payment for that lakeside villa was a staggering $4,400. Ryan, with his financial manager title, claimed his salary could only absorb $1,400 a month while keeping up with Amanda's lifestyle expenses. So, who covered the remaining $3,000 every single month for 36 months straight? I did. I transferred $3,000 every 30 days directly from my $5,000 monthly widow's insurance annuity. I left myself with just $2,000, eating generic brands, while Amanda spent $350 on French perfume. The total calculated investment was $335,360. But the ultimate payload wasn't the numerical ledger. It was hidden at the bottom of the box inside a pocket of space containing a crisp, yellowish manila envelope from our family notary, Thomas. I pulled out the original deed for the property at 847 Juris Circuit. I opened the parchment with steady, clinical fingers. My eyes locked onto the legal line, confirming the sole registered owner, Laura Henderson. When we bought the property, Thomas insisted that since I was financing the entire down payment, the title must remain in my name for asset protection. Ryan had agreed back then, constantly delaying the transfer out of pure inertia. He had told me, "Safer for you, Mom. We can visit the lawyer next week." Next week never came. For 3 years, they treated me like an uninvited servant in my own house. They had no idea that legally, they were nothing more than leaseless tenants living on my absolute sufferance. At 1:23 in the morning, the security gate at Crystal Lake Enclave opened for them. They stumbled through the front door, wrapped in the loud, arrogant fog of champagne and expensive whiskey. Amanda was practically floating on Ryan's shoulder, riding the high of her new title. But when they flicked on the living room lights, the alcohol instantly lost its power. The house didn't welcome them with its usual warmth. It felt cold, clinical, and completely empty. Amanda noticed the missing spaces first, the bare wall where my husband's landscapes used to hang, the empty floor where my mother's hand-woven rug had been. The domestic machine they relied on had stopped running, and for the first time, they were looking at a house that refused to play along. When they ran upstairs and saw my bedroom closet completely bare, Amanda's entitlement didn't morph into guilt. It transformed into pure, defensive narcissism. To her, my quiet exit wasn't a cry of pain. It was a deliberate act of sabotage, timed to ruin her corporate milestone. She didn't call to ask if I was safe or where a 69-year-old widow would go in the middle of the night. Instead, she weaponized the family group chat. My screen lit up with a barrage of texts, calling me ungrateful, manipulative, and dramatic. She claimed I was throwing a childish tantrum because I couldn't handle her success. It was classic gaslighting, a transactional attempt to rewrite the narrative so she could remain the righteous victim in her carefully curated world. Then came my son. Ryan's defensive voicemail started rolling in, his voice tight, laced with frustration rather than remorse. He didn't ask how I slept, or if my back ached from 3 years of heavy lifting. He demanded to know where I was, because Amanda's regional travel schedule was entirely booked for the upcoming week. He said the logistics of the household were falling apart, that Caleb and Zoe needed to be driven to school, and that my sudden absence was creating an operational mess. Listening to his frantic words, the truth was laid bare in high definition. My own son didn't see a mother who was hurting. He saw an automated appliance that had suddenly broken down, disrupting his comfortable life. My labor had been a free utility he expected to run forever without maintenance. Amanda didn't stop with private texts. By sunrise, she took her hostility public, posting a performative status on Facebook for their entire social circle to see. She wrote about the heavy burden of dealing with toxic, ungrateful relatives, wrapping her malice in pseudo-philosophical quotes about boundaries. The caption read, "Some people completely forget who gave them a roof over their head." The irony was staggering, almost comical. She was broadcasting her righteousness to the world, fishing for sympathy from neighbors and colleagues, completely blind to the fact that her perfect public image was built on a foundation of lies. They thought they were punishing me with their digital warfare and social isolation. They truly believed they held all the structural leverage, entirely unaware that the legal trap was already set and I was about to drop the hammer. The digital noise of Amanda's Facebook post and Ryan's frantic voicemails meant nothing to me. I turned my phone face down on Vanessa's sleek mahogany desk. Vanessa, my niece, was a top-tier litigation attorney who spent her career dismantling predatory financial abuse against the elderly. She didn't look at my situation with tears. She looked at it with an icy professional hunger. I placed the yellow manila envelope containing the original deed and my mother's old wooden sewing box right in front of her. Vanessa pulled out the ledger, her sharp eyes scanning the $335,360 of tracked investments. "This isn't a family dispute, Aunt Laura," she said, her voice dropping into a cold, clinical cadence. "This is a financial crime scene." As we audited the banking history, we began to uncover the deep architectural framework of Amanda's pathology. Most people look at a daughter-in-law's cruelty and see pure, inexplicable evil. But Vanessa and I understood the hidden mechanisms behind her behavior. Amanda had fallen straight into the normalization trap of cruelty. She had grown up in severe, tattered poverty, watching her own mother work as a humiliated maid for wealthy families who never looked her in the eye. When Amanda, many years later, clawed her way into executive success at 35 years old, that childhood deprivation left her with a severe psychological wound, a deep narcissistic injury. To protect her fragile new ego, her mind demanded a hierarchy. She projects the servant identity of her past onto me, turning her own mother-in-law into an unpaid housekeeper just to artificially soothe her terror of looking inadequate. She normalized her cruel behavior because her fragile sense of status required a victim to prove she was finally the queen of the villa. But our analysis of her psychological defects was instantly cut short by a much more lethal discovery. Vanessa plugged my old $40 digital voice recorder into her laptop, navigating through the audio archives until she hit the 17th file. I sat in absolute, frozen silence as Amanda's voice filled the room. The recording, captured 6 weeks ago in the lakeside kitchen, caught her brazenly plotting on speakerphone with an unethical financial broker, completely ignoring my digital audio recorder on the counter because she thought I was too broken to care. She was explicitly organizing a scheme to forge my signature on a comprehensive power of attorney form. Her intent was calm, precise, and documented on tape. She wanted to drain the remaining $500,000 of my widow's insurance reserves before I realized what was happening. She assumed a 69-year-old widow would never audit her secondary accounts. Hearing her own husband, my son Ryan, stay submissively silent in the background of that recording was the final kill shot. Vanessa closed her laptop with a sharp, heavy thud that sounded like a prison door locking. The professional escalation was complete. This was no longer a civil argument about an untransferred deed or an uninvited dinner at a steakhouse. Amanda had crossed a legal Rubicon from domestic manipulation into a documented felony. We held ironclad proof of intent to commit elder fraud and forgery. They had no defensive ground left to stand on, no moral leverage, and zero paths to emotional redemption. Vanessa looked at me, her pen poised over a formal summons. "We aren't mediating, Aunt Laura," she whispered. The clock on the wall of Vanessa's law office struck exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. The heavy mahogany doors shut out the noise of the city, sealing us inside a room that smelled of ancient paper and absolute legal finality. My son Ryan entered first, his charcoal suit hanging loose on shoulders that had noticeably slumped over the past days. Behind him came Amanda. Her corporate armor was tightly buckled, her hair styled with precision, but her steps lacked their usual rhythmic defiance. They sat across the wide conference table from Vanessa and me, completely lured into a trap, convinced they were attending an informal family mediation to finally force the deed into their names. They thought this was a negotiation where they still held emotional leverage. Vanessa did not open with pleasantries. She didn't invite them into a conversation. She simply unclasped her briefcase with a crisp metal click that cut through the silence like a scalpel. She laid out copies of the certified deed, the financial investment ledger totaling $335,360, and then she placed her laptop directly in the center of the table. "We are not here to discuss your housing operational needs, Ryan," Vanessa stated, her tone flat and clinical. "We are here to present an institutional baseline." Before Amanda could launch into a rehearsed narrative about family unity and overreactions, Vanessa flatly pressed play. The 17th file from my voice recorder filled the room. The audio was clear, factual, and lethal. Amanda's voice echoed across the mahogany, detailing her systematic plan to forge my signature on a power of attorney document to liquidate my remaining $500,000 of insurance reserves. With every second of the tape that played, the calculated corporate facade Amanda wore began to physically unravel. The color drained from her skin, her breath catching in her throat until she was hyperventilating in sheer, unchecked terror. She was looking at an active felony profile that would trigger immediate corporate blacklisting and a prison sentence for elder fraud. Ryan sat utterly paralyzed beside her. As his wife's recorded malice and his own total moral bankruptcy played out in high definition, my son buried his face in his hands. He began to weep, thick, heavy tears of absolute shame hitting the dark wood. He was finally absorbing the cost of his conflict avoidance. He had traded his mother's dignity for a peace that was completely corrupted. Amanda's hands trembled so violently she had to press them against the table to stop the shaking. Her eyes, red and wide with panic, locked onto mine. "Please, Laura," she whispered, her voice cracking, stripped of all its former condescension. "We will lose everything. The children! Think of the children. Do something. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of the compliance they had counted on for 3 years. But there was only an icy, unyielding clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was an accounting. I didn't answer her. I didn't engage in their panic. With absolute composure, I slid a glass folder containing a document across the table, delivering the final, lethal finisher. It was a formal 30-day notice to vacate, legally demanding they clear out of my property. I already did, I said. I did not seek to destroy my son completely, because true vengeance is cheap, but justice must be instructive. Instead of empty ruin, I enforced an ironclad framework of accountability, maintaining 100% sole ownership of the estate. Since they could no longer afford the $4,400 mortgage without my $3,000 monthly subsidy, I gave them a choice: sign a brutal, room-restricted lease agreement, or face immediate criminal prosecution for fraud. To cover the financial deficit they created, I officially moved Melissa, a resilient, widowed librarian, and her 2 teenagers, Justin and Abigail, straight into the Crystal Lake Enclave estate as my primary paying tenants. Amanda was legally forced to share her elite kitchen and common spaces with a family she did not choose, completely shattering her superficial illusions of absolute status and domain. Every time she reached for a glass or inspected a counter, she had to navigate the presence of people who paid their rent on time and had every right to occupy the space. Meanwhile, as a condition of his new lease, Ryan was legally bound to attend mandatory weekly reconciliation sessions with me to rebuild his core emotional accountability and learn how to be a son again. 1 year later, the soft golden leaves of autumn settled over a sunny park bench where I sat watching the children. My grandchildren, Caleb and Zoe, were seamlessly chasing a soccer ball with Melissa's kids under the crisp blue sky. The healing was slow, marked by permanent scars, but the relational ecosystem had fundamentally shifted. Ryan still called me every Sunday, not out of structural obligation, but out of a genuine desire to ask how I slept and what I needed. Amanda had grown quieter, learning the hard metrics of humility and gratitude from a shared household that refused to bow to her corporate arrogance. Looking back on the night I walked out with my suitcase, I've come to realize that true wealth isn't measured by the assets you accumulate, but by the dignity you refuse to let others take from you. This journey wasn't about revenge, it was about accounting. It was about implementing a system of restorative justice that forced an echo of empathy through reality. If you find yourself in a similar situation, hiding your pain to keep a toxic family peace, remember this: your compassion is a premium resource, not an unlimited utility for others to overdraft. Forgiveness isn't always about erasing the past. Sometimes it is the act of setting yourself completely free from expectations that were designed to keep you invisible. You do not owe anyone your absolute submission just because you share a surname. Breaking a painful habit isn't selfish, it is survival. If this story reminded you that love without respect is nothing more than a degrading habit, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs the courage to enforce their own boundaries today. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, what time it is for you right now, and your thoughts on this story. I read every single one.